For that. For more, let's welcome in columnist for the Daily Signal and author of The War on History, Jarrett Stepman. Jarrett, thanks for coming back to the show. How can the left call Donald Trump a threat to democracy and then try to count invalid ballots? This seems like the height of hypocrisy. They're willing to ignore election law to try and win an election.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I mean, just a few years ago, they were saying that voter fraud and things like this don't happen. Now they're saying, well, it's happening, and I guess that's a good thing. I think we've seen this time and again from Democrats. When it's an election that doesn't go their way, they have very frequently said that it was illegitimate in some way or another. This goes back not just in presidential elections, but a lot of local and state elections too. And this time, the election didn't go their way. I think very clear cut. I think the rules were clear cut actually in this place. The courts have weighed in, and I think it's ridiculous now that they refuse essentially to concede this seat that has long ago been over. I think this erodes the confidence of the American people in the election system, especially in Pennsylvania. It's a good thing to a certain extent that this was more or less a landslide election, because this could have been very closely contested. What if the Senate was actually up for grabs in this case? So very much bad on them. I think there's been a clear lack of leadership, and bad on Democrats for contesting this so long.
Well, and now I understand why Donald Trump kept saying too big to rig. You know, that's win by enough so that a couple thousand votes, people are dismissing, oh, it's just a couple thousand. But he needed that padding because apparently Democrats are willing to bend the rules to count as many votes as they can, even if the votes weren't legal votes. But I do want to move on to get some of your thoughts on some of President-elect Trump's choices to fill his incoming administration. There's been a lot of controversy lately, and according to Axios, Trump is now calling senators to persuade them to confirm Matt Gaetz as his attorney general, because several Republican lawmakers are now telling Trump and his team that Gaetz has little chance of being confirmed. What do you think, Jarrett? Do you think he can win confirmation?
I think he can win. It's a matter of how much Trump is willing to pressure those senators. I think there's no question that Gaetz does represent Trump's agenda, especially when it comes to the Attorney General's office, the FBI. I mean, the biggest problem I think that he's learned the last 4 years is how this agency can be weaponized against the American people. That's a very big deal. And Gaetz is one of those members of Congress who's been most aggressive on this issue. There's no question that he does stand for at least the agenda of the incoming Trump administration. That's a good thing. As far as, will these senators actually back down? Well, maybe they won't, but they're not going to get, I think, another crack at torpedoing another pick. So they better be very careful about whether or not they want to actually torpedo Gaetz. I think they're actually taking a huge political risk in doing so. If Gaetz gets torpedoed, the next choice, I think, will certainly get through, and it may be somebody very similar. We'll see.
Well, there's been a lot of pressure on the House to release that ethics committee report, and at this point, at least so far, they're not willing to do that. Do you think that they might? Do you think that they should? Or do you think it's old news at this point?
I think they will. I think that will definitely get out there. There is some element of, well, if this was so serious, why wasn't their charges brought up earlier? It does seem like maybe he's being targeted at this time. And I think that is quite problematic. This is going to be a serious political showdown of all his cabinet members. And it's interesting because I do think that this is maybe the most important nomination. I mean, this was a big battle of the last 4 years for Trump, is the weaponization of the legal apparatus of government. That's why this is so important. That's why I can see why this is an important fight that Trump may not want to concede.
Jarrett, we have time for one more question. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee called FEMA Administrator Dean Criswell to testify about an employee who instructed her subordinates not to go to houses with Trump signs or flags in a strictly political order. We talked about that on this show when it happened. Representative Van Drew pointed out that this is actually a disturbing trend. Watch this.
Is a culture in America that this issue represents and symbolizes. And I know you've talked about it, but the reason we keep going back to it, Administrator, it's a really big deal. It's the First Amendment that people have the right to express their viewpoint, their feelings, who they want to vote for, what they believe, whether they're liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, Trump or Harris, who cares? Because guess what? The folks on the other side of the aisle should know if it happened to us, it could happen to them.
Partisanship when it comes to giving aid to hurricane victims. Quickly, your thoughts, Jarrett.
It's unbelievable. It's something that I think a lot of Americans rightly feared, that it's not just the fact that we've empowered the bureaucratic state, but that it's woke. It's determining who should benefit and who shouldn't based on, I think, very ideological ends. And I think that corruption goes very deep. I think it's why Trump has a mandate now to reform the bureaucracy itself, because I think this mentality is not just about one corrupt official. It's about a mentality that goes throughout our government. It's a dangerous, toxic one. It's one that's typical of revolutionary regimes that want to punish their fellow citizens. It's not one that we expect in a federal republic like ours. And I do hope that this goes beyond just punishing a few officials and looks at the entire structures of these agencies to try to get rid of the ones who have weaponized government against fellow citizens or refuse to actually give benefits to people who deserve it.
The party of joy, joy for us, but no joy for you. Jarrett Stepman, thanks very much for being with us.